This is the Power Break Podcast, number 211, titled The Truth About Indecisiveness. Hi, everyone. I'm Bob Brubaker, along with JT, as we hope you'll stay tuned as we seek to give you a little power in this break to help you succeed in the race of life.
This is the Power Break Podcast with a focus on the spiritual, the mental, and the physical aspects, all to help you succeed in the race of life. For show notes from today's podcast, go to bobbrubaker.com and follow the link for the Power Break Podcast. Bob, such a great topic because some of us can't even decide when we should decide something, so it doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, I thought that I was trying to decide what to write on, and
you were indecisive. See, it's perfect.
I was indecisive. Well, hey, I wanted to say that it was great to see JT last week, folks. That JT all of a sudden made a sudden appearance in Florida. There was a JT sighting.
That's right.
And he actually came to my house. It was wonderful to see JT in person and know that although we communicate by way of FaceTime while we're recording and we put the pieces together, people always wonder if you're in the studio with me still. Kind of.
Sort of, yeah. They're just separate studios quite far away from each other. But, yeah, you know, that's a compliment to your editing, buddy, because people still think we're in the same room. Because at first I think we had a hard time pulling that off, but now I think we're pretty fluid with it. So, kudos to you, my friend. Kudos to you.
Well, I'm very thankful that you're the one who did the investigation and see how we could pull this off, and found a way. Then there it goes. So here we are, folks, once again for the Power Break Podcast. And before we go any further, as we do each week on our podcast, to thank you for listening, number one. Number two, for telling others about the podcast and letting them know by social media, or however you do it. We appreciate it, letting people know about us, and also giving us a rating and or a review wherever you download the podcast. That really does help. Thank you so much.
It does. If you get anything out of the podcast, and I hope you do, then if you leave a 5-star rating, it makes it easier for other people to find it. So really it's kind of paying it forward by just leaving a 5-star review. So we do appreciate it, and we love our fans. And don't forget to contact us if you have any questions, because JT at bobbrubaker.com right now is full of spam, I would say, mostly.
Hey,
we had one.
Really?
We had one encouraging thing come in from one of the listeners, which was awesome and just absolutely made my day. But yeah, we got a whole bunch of advertisements in there, Bob.
Oh, I thought you meant that you actually had spam, like in the meat in a can.
Says the spam man. No, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't have any of that spam.
No spam for you today. Spam musubi. Anyway, we're talking about the truth about being indecisive, or the truth about indecisiveness. So, JT, here's your opportunity. Give us all those
to be decisive.
To be decisive, and tell us what comes to mind when you hear that title, The Truth About Indecisiveness.
Well, I think indecisiveness, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is the scripture where let your no be no and your yes mean yes. Everything else is from the devil, right? And I think about that, and I think about the point of that scripture is think about what you're going to do, give an answer, and then kind of stick with that. A lot of times we second guess ourselves and we end up in a lot of trouble, or we end up missing the opportunities that we have that God put in our way. You know, and I'll connect that a little bit to last week's, where we talked about that, you know, these handfuls of purpose that we have a tendency to walk right by and not even know that God left them for us. And if we're indecisive, we'll get into that, you know, and in police work, we used to have this thing, and you and I have talked about this on prior podcasts, called analysis paralysis. And basically where you just stare at somebody or at something, some problem for too long. And the more you think about it, the more indecisive you become. And we need to make sure that we kind of stay out of that. And we also talked a little bit about decision fatigue, right? So,
right.
Yeah. So like all that stuff kind of comes into play when you're talking about being decisive and staying the course and staying focused on what the prize is as opposed to getting distracted. So that's what I think about. I mean, where do you come from on that, Bob?
I think that you're absolutely right. Sometimes we do get paralysis by over-analysis. And I was thinking about a person in the Bible that really led that way, because his name was Gideon. And God told him to go and fight the Midianites. And he says, no, God, if you're on my side, he says, let this, when the dew falls on the ground, let the fleece be dry.
Right.
And that happened. And he says, I better analyze this some more.
Right. Then he asked God to do something else.
Yeah, let's try that again. This time, let the fleece be wet and the ground be dry. And it happened. So he says, well, he didn't have any choice now. He's got to go because he gave twice. He wanted a sign. But anyway, that's sometimes where we are. So here's the truth. Here's the point that we're trying to make today, that we all see the truth about indecisiveness. That is the very fact that being indecisive will hurt us in the long run. So it's best to move forward on your decision making. Now, here's what it says in the book of James. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith, no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. That's being indecisive, even though you've asked God for wisdom. He says, for that person must not suppose that he will receive, notice this, anything from the Lord. He's a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. Ouch!
Yeah.
Indecisiveness can hurt us. So that's what we're talking about today, the truth about indecisiveness.
Yeah, so let's continue to talk more about that as we turn to your blog, folks. I'm going to say it, and I'm going to say it again. Get over to bobrubaker.com, check out all the resources, but at the very least, sign up for the blog. It'll show up every Monday, right to your mailbox. MailChimp, Bob and I ended up figuring something out when we saw each other. Bob does get up earlier than the MailChimp, but not by much. We did figure that. But it'll show up every Monday, get you started, and also get you prepared for what we're about to talk about that week on the podcast. So I encourage you to get over there. But let's continue to talk more about your article, The Truth About Indecisiveness.
As I wrote in the article, that decisions are made every day. In fact, most of us make hundreds of decisions each day. But what about the decisions that we're putting off? That's what we're dealing with today. The decision to actually make no decision about something. That's called indecisiveness. And that is something that will hurt us in the long run. Granted, there are times when we do suffer from, as JT mentioned earlier, decision fatigue is when we are just so tired. We're just tired of making decisions all day, and we get home. We need something to eat, and instead of turning to something that is good for us, we quickly fall into the trap of something that's quick and easy. That's decision fatigue, but that's not what we're talking about here. Indecisiveness is just a refusal to go with a decision for any number of reasons. It could be just plain procrastination, or it could be fear of making the wrong decision. Regardless of what lies behind the choice of making no choice, it's just not a good idea to be indecisive.
Right.
There are also times when we're weighing out the decision that you're making as to whether you're seeking the Lord's guidance for what is right choice to make, and that time of indecision that's called seeking wisdom. And that's not a bad thing, as pointed out in James chapter 1, verses 5 through 8. If you lack wisdom, ask God. He'll give to you generally. But notice it says that not to be double-minded, and that means when God gives you the insight as to what direction you should take, you don't put it off, you just do it. It's better, as the old saying goes, that you make a decision and go with it and be ready to be changed by God. As the old saying goes, it's easier to move a moving ship than it is to turn one that's not moving.
Yeah. I used to teach a lot of active shooter response stuff and a lot of tactical stuff. Most of our listeners probably know that. But one of the things I used to tell people all the time, because what I found was that indecisiveness was causing a lot of officers to get hurt and also causing a lot of citizens to get hurt because they were allowed to escalate to a point to where a much higher use of force had to be applied. So I used to tell people all the time, there's in a moment of where action is required, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The second best thing you can do is the wrong thing, but the very worst thing you can do is nothing. So
that's good.
Yeah,
that's quotable, ladies and gentlemen. That's quotable from JT. By the way, I've got a question on that. What was that? You one of the things you taught in the active shooter program, like say churches to be prepared, is everybody carried a coffee cup, the steel coffee. What do you call those things? Just steel coffee cup.
Yeah, it's like the Tervis tumblers, or the Yeti cups. Yeti was kind of the one.
That's what I'm looking at. Yeah. I mean, you were saying, I think, as I remember in the session I sat in on, that one of the things that can happen is if there's an active shooter comes in to the church, if everybody has one of those Yeti cups, those steel cups, as you turn and everybody toss it at the guy that's the shooter, throws him out of throws him out of his game,
Well, it does. Nobody expects to catch a Yeti in that. So it's certainly at the very least distracting and gives you the opportunity to get, it gives you a couple seconds to kind of get the upper hand on the person. And that's really the goal of it. And I mean, and if it hurts them, that's even better, makes it to where they can't actually shoot at people physically. That's even better. But, it's funny when I taught at the city, because that was the first place that I really taught the run, hide, fight stuff was employees for the city of Largo. And when I should have been more industrious about it, because as we were talking about the different, we used to call them improvised weapons. As we were talking about those different improvised weapons that you could use, like throwing a stapler at somebody or a Yeti cup, everybody told me like within like a month, every meeting they went to, everybody had one of those metal coffee cups. And I was like, in hindsight, I should have taught that class and then sold those cups. That's what I should have.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I should have done. Made some money out of that.
That would have been double dipping there, JT.
I know. Not ethical, but super funny.
Yeah. You just said it a joke. Anyway, check out the article, The Truth About Indecisiveness. We talked more about being a sluggard and talked more about you need to make a decision and stick with it and go with it. But it's there in the article that's found at bobbrubaker.com. Check it out. Again, the article is called The Truth About Indecisiveness.
So what else is happening, Bob? You got anything you want the listeners to know about this week?
Well, talk about being decisive. I thought it would be good to be decisive about the Lord's Day, Sunday, finding delight in the Lord's Day and spending time with Him in worship and taking a needed rest. That's what it's all about. And I wrote a book about it, so it's not like this legalistic thing, you better do this or you better do that.
Right.
No, it's finding delight in the Lord's Day. You'll find the book at bobbrubaker.com. Scroll through the resources. You'll click on that at the top and then go to the resources and go through the books. You'll find it, Finding Delight in the Lord's Day. And while you're there, check out the sermons I preach here at Christ Community Presbyterian Church in Clearwater, Florida. The sermon links are on the website. And the sermons I'm preaching right now, going through the book of Psalms for another couple of weeks as we go through the Psalms each summer, pick it up where we left off. This summer was Psalm 75. We'll conclude with Psalm 87 on the last Sunday of August. But check it out, the sermon links and the books and more at bobbrubaker.com.
This is the Power Break Podcast. I'm JT along with Bob Brubaker, and this is time on the podcast for questions and answers. If you have a question for me or for Bob, feel free to email me at jt@bobbrubaker.com, and we'll get to answering that question on an upcoming Power Break podcast. So question number 1 from the spiritual side of life.
Well, first of all, let me just say thanks so much for your diligence. You made a decision. I remember when you made that decision to teach the active shooter program, and it's still going on in the Largo PD, thanks to you. And and you taught many people, and I know that's on the mind of many today because they hear about active shooters here and there. And so, the great training. And if we'd recommend the people in their communities talk to the local police department about active shooter training because it can save lives. So thank you, JT, for going out of your way to start that in the Largo Police Department.
Oh, yeah, of course. Are you kidding me? That was all God for sure, because I found out about that training by well, it was an accident for me, but it wasn't an accident for him. So
yeah,
I got an email about that training from a trainers list that I had been taken off of like 3 years prior to that. So I shouldn't even have gotten that email, but I did. So it was pretty awesome, pretty special. And I'm so thankful that our buddy Keith Bowling is doing it now. Vu.
Oh, wow. Hey, Keith.
Yeah, Vu retired, believe it or not. Vu is he's living out in California right now. I think he actually owns like a flower business. It's pretty...
Well, there you go.
Yeah, it's very cool, but he sounds very happy. He sounds great, so I'm excited for him.
Well, shout out to Keith then. Hey, Keith, keep it up, buddy.
That's it. All right, back to question number 1. So let's say I'm in need of making a decision, but I keep putting the decision off. And the decision-making process, I don't want to make the wrong decision, so I just keep procrastinating, which I think all of us at some point or another have a tendency to do. And I'll talk a little bit about a decision that kind of was a procrastination decision for me and Amy that we just recently made. But what is your counsel in helping me as that indecisive person to make a good decision?
Well, first of all, we understand that God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and, as it says in the King James Version, a sound mind. So first of all, we have to understand that he didn't make us into dummies. So he's given us a sound mind. So put that together with the fact that he says, if you lack wisdom, ask me, and I'll give it generously. That's through the promise in James chapter 1, verses 5 through 8. So putting that together, I usually recommend this. You start a pro-con list. So you start the decision you're going to make.
Right.
And you write down your options, and you write pros and cons on your options. And you pray over that, and you keep the list going for a number of days, maybe even weeks. And as you think of things, as you're praying and as you're seeking God on it, and seeking maybe some wise counsel of a good Christian brother or sister, and then as you write it, you write down the pros and cons. And as you'll notice, as you review that and pray over that, there's something that rises to the top. And as it rises to the top, you'll notice that there's a peace about it. Well, that's very much in line with James chapter 3, verse 17. He says, the wisdom from above is first of all pure and then peaceable. Okay, so it's going to provide peace for you. And, going through this process is very important because whatever decision we're making, especially when it's a hard decision, if we make that decision, more often than not, we start to have doubts afterwards. I wonder if I made the right decision.
Yeah.
But by doing the work here gives us confidence to say, no, when I have those doubts, look, here's the process I went through. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And that's really kind of the process that we just went through. We were making a decision about, where we ended up as far as neighborhood-wise. No question in my mind we were supposed to live here because really God just put it in our lap. So no question. And we were trying to find out as we figured out that this is predominantly a retirement community. Okay, so why did God put us here when we have 2 younger kids and there's no other kids for them to play with, for me to get them to different activities? It's a long drive. What was it that really got? So honestly, because we were so convinced God put us here, we kind of procrastinated looking at moving to closer to a town. So, what we did was we did exactly what you said. I was like, you know something? We've talked a lot about these issues. Let's just write this down. You know, what's the benefit of moving to this town as opposed to staying where we are? And it just became so clear. It was like, man, you know, of course the kids need to be closer to other kids. That's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah.
You know, so, but we went through that process, but we were so indecisive beforehand only because we didn't write down those facts that you talked about. Make it to where you write it down and you can see it, you know, because you don't remember all the facts throughout the day as you're thinking about that decision half the time. Right.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. You always end up forgetting stuff. So, by the end, you can talk yourself right into, you know, in our case, staying here. But the simple truth is, you know, it was once we wrote it down, I was like, yeah, well, of course we got to get these kids closer to other kids. I mean, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So, yeah, no, that's some great advice, Bob. The list, I think, is super important. So, from the mental aspect of it, how can we mentally guard against indecisiveness? Because that can almost become a personality trait. Like, there was a guy that I worked with. Honestly, everybody knew him as a guy who had a hard time making a decision. So it became a personality trait for him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things we need to kind of be shocked into it, you know, the scriptures shock us when it says what will happen if we are indecisive. And again, from James chapter 1, verses 5 through 8, it says that when you ask God for wisdom, you ask in faith, no doubting. Instead of, you're ready to move ahead.
Right.
He says the one who doubts, the one who likes to fence straddle and not make a decision is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed. He says that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. That is a very big statement. Okay, so
yeah, that's huge.
So when we refuse to act on when we say I'm going to be indecisive in this, and just our decision is to make no decision, then that carries over into other parts of our lives. So either that, or sometimes we recognize we do suffer from decision fatigue, and we overcome that, of course, by making the decisions ahead of time, so we don't have to worry about those decision fatigue times. But the other part is that many times it's just simple procrastination. And the Bible, again, is very clear about procrastination. The Bible says that's being a sluggard. It says the soul of the sluggard craves but gets nothing, while the soul of the diligent is richly supplied. The sluggard does not plow in autumn; he will seek at harvest and have nothing. Kind of scary verbs there that says God says if you're going to be indecisive, don't expect much. And that's the truth.
Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of us, the key there is the faith part for me, is you must ask in faith because you must take the answer in faith. Because a lot of times when you ask for something from God, you get an answer that you don't like. That wasn't the one that you thought was going to be the best. And what you end up doing is being indecisive or just refusing to take those steps that he's put in front of you. And it's because you didn't ask in faith. You know, my grandmother used to say that thing all the time. She used to be like, you know, be careful what you ask for. You just might get it. And sometimes what you ask for from God, the wisdom that he provides you or the action that he makes so obvious in front of you isn't the one that you want to take, but it's the one that honors him. So you must ask in faith, because if you don't, you are going to be indecisive. You're going to be tossed back and forth by the wind, and you can't expect to get anything, or you can't expect to get anywhere with that kind of attitude. That's why I love the way James writes it. I love the way he puts it so straightforward. It's like, God gives generously, you have to ask. But if you ask without faith, you will be double-minded and you will waver and you will get nothing.
I think many times people waver because what they really want is God's stamp of approval on their decision, and they realize that's not a good decision, so they're waiting for God to say, yeah, go ahead and do it.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, you reminded me of how many times Pastor Chris Stevens down in Florida, he told me a lot of times that people who were thinking about being unfaithful to their significant other, they would frame it in a way to where, well, God put this person in my life for a reason.
Oh,
yeah. When all he'd say is, well, where does it say in there that it's biblical for you to cheat on your wife? and they'd just be like, well, it was that you weren't really asking in faith, because I know the answer to that question. There's nothing biblical about it, and that's not what God wants me to do.
That's right.
Yeah, I agree.
That's why it says the wisdom that's from above is first of all pure. It's not going to go against God's word.
That's right.
Good point, JT.
That's right.
Good point.
All right, let's go to question number 3 from the physical aspect of life. So how can a person be patient and persevere when trying to lose weight? Now, you and I talked about losing weight and last week, right? So, how can we do that?
I think one of the things we keep in mind, because sometimes it's a matter of feeling like you're burned out. Sometimes we don't persevere because we feel like we're burned out. Now, burning out, there's just a sense of stalling. Sometimes you obsess over little things, stupid things. You dread workouts. You dread going forward in your training and also in your eating processes, and you feel a constant urge just to quit and you desire to give up. Some of the things that really need to go back to, I think, that help us to overcome that is to understand why we wanted to lose weight to begin with, right?
That's right.
Make sure that your goals are meaningful, within your control. In other words, you don't say, I'm going to lose 50 pounds in 1 week. Go ahead and try that. You won't be living very long, right?
Yeah, that's not going to happen. Yeah.
And then make sure that you incorporate in your training. I think this is very good. I think you do a good job of this. Make sure that you have play days.
Oh, yeah. No, I probably have way too many of them, to be honest with you. But to me, riding a bike is fun. It's like, I can pop off of this, or I can jump this, or I can, pump these and get faster. Like, to me, it's about whatever it is that you're doing, whether you're riding a bike or whether you're running or whatever, it's got to be fun. If it's not fun, you can find something else to do physically that's fun. I promise you.
Yeah, and that brings up the other point is keeping variety. If you're in an eating program, make sure that you find some variety for that program, whatever you're doing, keto, paleo, or whatever it is. Keep some variety in that, but also on your training, some variety. I know cycling, we both cycle. JT has mountain bikes and I'm road bike, but some variety. Do some things that are different. Some different types of training will help keep it interesting. What say you, JT? Anything else to add to that?
No, I think really the key is to have fun. And a lot of times we will get to where we will make something not fun by doing it too much. So variety is a really great way of keeping things fun. Like today, I went over to Lake James, and all I said to myself was, this is all about having a blast. I don't care how fast I'm going. I don't care how slow I'm going. I'm just going to have a good time. And that's what I did. And, I stopped and,
that's good.
And did different, things over again. I sessioned them, just because they were fun. So, it can't, what is that saying? All work and no play makes Johnny a dull boy. The simple truth is you got to have fun. Like all these guys that race, they race because they have a blast when they're doing it. You can tell, they would rather be no place else at the moment. And I really would encourage everybody to find that, for me, going down a mountain is like that, but for most people, it's not. Some people like the cross-country stuff. Some people like the road stuff. Some people like gravel riding, because they want to be out in the forest, but they don't want to do downhill. And you can pick any sport. I know there's just a bunch of different things that you can do, but folks, make it fun so you don't burn out for sure.
And it takes discipline to do that in all these matters. So, as we always mention each week, discipline does make the difference in all aspects of life. Check out today's show notes at BobBrubaker.com. Click on the Power Break podcast. Today is show number 211.
Crazy. And submit your questions by email to jt@BobBrubaker.com, and we'll get to answering those on an upcoming Power Break podcast.
While you're at BobBrubaker.com, check out the resources and the books. In the books, you'll find the book Finding Delight in the Lord's Day. Finding Delight in the Lord's Day. Check it out at BobBrubaker.com.
Well, thank you for joining us for the Power Break podcast. Please subscribe and leave a review wherever you've downloaded the podcast. And check out show notes, news, Bob's weekly blog, and other cool things at BobBrubaker.com. And listen next time for the Power Break podcast.